Salamun alaikum. So finally, the siblings get what they want. This is part 12 of the series. And we continue with the story of Surah Yussuf. And now it gets a little bit more complicated even. And Yusuf gets to lose one of the rounds. And we will see that despite the fact that the siblings force his hand to carry out an investigation in public, he still will try to turn it to his benefit. And eventually the siblings will not get what they want. So we start. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. So this is part 12. As we said, the title of this segment is the investigation finally takes place. It's not what Yusuf wanted, but he will make the best of it. The brothers do not achieve what they want anyway, but they keep trying and trying again and again, as we will see. So remember, this presentation is at the level of a graduate school course. Please take it seriously, take notes, work the homework, review the ayat, review the translations and the interpretations, compare them to the traditional story with which you're familiar, and you will see how by comparison that traditional story pales and lays out flat and it doesn't produce any real semantic value, whereas this story is so rich and so full of information. And it turns out that this scene, which is the second trip for the brothers in Misr, is very, very important for the rest of the whole surah. I hope you're taking notes, keep track of your questions, and inshallah we will deal with them as we go forward. In this segment, we will deal with ayah 1276 to ayah 1279. So inshallah, we will include those ayat and we will complete the segment with some closing remarks. So ayah 1276, we start with this ayah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. فبدأ بأوعيتهم قبل وعاء أخيه ثم استخرجها من وعاء أخيه كذلك كدنا ليوسف ما كان ليأخذ أخاه في دين الملك إلا أن يشاء الله نرفع درجات من نشاء وفوق كل ذي علم عليم. Remember, this scene is actually after the brothers kept pushing for an investigation and they tried in multiple ways until they finally got their way. So this is the actual investigation. This is the details of what Yusuf had to do to carry out the investigation. And just the fact that the Quran is showing us the details of how they were looking for specific evidence tells us a lot about the standards of justice under the laws of the king. And therefore, as we said before, Yusuf respected the laws of the king and respected the king himself. And as we said before, we will get to see later, inshallah, that the king himself was following monotheism, the Abrahamic monotheism that Yusuf preached, and the king was a very fair person. He established good laws, good moral leadership for the whole state. The translation of this ayah goes, and thus he, meaning one of Yusuf's servants, of course not Yusuf by himself, digging in the stuff and doing the search, acting on the instructions of Yusuf, started with searching the contents of their containers, أوعيتهم, before the younger brother's container. So his strategy was to start with all the other ones first, before at the end getting to the travel packs and the containers that belonged to the younger brother. And then he proceeded to extract it, meaning the missing item or the stolen item or the measuring standard, whatever you want to call it. It's really just some drinking utensils. It is not of much value anyway. But as we said, but remember what we said in the prior episode, that the authorities assigned it a high value sounding name so that to try to entrap the brothers into either selling it or coming forward to exchange it for the full camel's load in order to entrap them. So Yusuf was setting up the stage, but they did not take the bait. So they were aware of what Yusuf was trying to do, and they did not fall for it. They kept pushing for the investigation. So he extracted it from his younger brother's container. That is how we, Allah, steered the collusion by the siblings to turn out for the benefit of Yusuf. كَذَلِكَ كِدْنَا لِيُوسُف. We're going to explain it in full detail. He, meaning Yusuf, was not to detain any of his oldest brothers in accordance with the king's established order, except had Allah willed it, except by the will of Allah, and Allah did not will it, and therefore, as we will see, he did not find anything of value that is stolen in the property or in the containers, the bags, the sacks, whatever you want to call it, that the brothers carried. So the brothers were very careful, they were very astute not to be caught, because they suspected, as we said before, that Yusuf might be in a high position in Misr. And therefore they knew that if they made one mistake, they were to be caught, they were to be punished, and therefore they avoided this. They were smart about it. They played it right. They placed the stolen item only in the travel packs or the containers of the younger brother. So he extracted it from his younger brother, and then Allah is giving us a commentary. كَذَلِكَ كِدْنَا لِيُوسُف. That is how we, Allah, steered the collusion by the siblings to turn out in favor or for the benefit of Yusuf, of course, and his younger brother. In other words, when they found the stolen item in the travel packs or the containers of the younger brother was arrested and taken away. And therefore, the siblings felt that they succeeded. But wait, they're not done. You're going to see in the next ayah that they attempt to do more damage. So they thought that the younger brother was caught and was taken away to prison or to slavery or whatever punishment he would receive under the laws of the king. So Allah gives us a commentary. He was not, meaning Yusuf, was not to detain any of his brothers, مَا كَانَ لِيَأْخُذَ أَخَاهُ, one or more of the older ones, in accordance with the king's established order, because he could not find anything against them. So therefore, he was not successful in doing this. And that's how Allah wanted it. We're going to come back to this issue. Why did Allah want it this way? Why did Allah not let Yusuf succeed in catching any of his older brothers? We will see. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues in the ayah, نَرْفَعُ دَرَجَاتٍ مَّن نَشَاءُ. We elevate by multiple levels whomever we will. وَفَوْقَ كُلِّ ذِي عِلْمٍ عَلِيمٍ. And above every person with knowledge is one who discloses the evidence-based knowledge, meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So now there are lots of lessons in this ayah. I'm going to go slowly. We're going to give it one bite at a time, Luqman style, if you remember. And then we're going to deal with it one piece at a time so we can really appreciate what's going on. First, in the notes, why did Yusuf want to start searching the brothers' containers before the younger brother's container? And the answer is, in case the siblings had stolen something, he could find with them, meaning stolen. And then he would stop the investigation before it gets to the younger brother. He was counting that perhaps on the off chance they made a mistake and they placed the stolen item in one of their packs by accident or by mistake or by ignorance or by negligence, whatever it is. He was to cover that basis. He wanted to make sure that that mistake is something they did not make, because had they made that mistake, he would have caught them. He would have captured one or more of them as thieves, and therefore he would have achieved at least part of his plan. Remember, his plan was to stop them or to prove them as liars and thieves, but their plan was to push for the arrest of the younger one, disposal of him, and if they can, which we're going to see in the next ayah, Yusuf himself. That was their real plan. They promised their father that they would carry out the oath and bring Yusuf to him on their way back, but that was not really their objective. All along, they were sticking to the original plan, which we saw at the very beginning of the surah, which is get rid of Yusuf, get rid of his brother. So the second question is, what is the significance of the expressions أَوْعِيَتِهِمْ وِعَاءَ أَخِيهِ, as we see in here, فَبَدَأَ بِأَوْعِيَتِهِمْ, their containers, before the container of his brother, and then he extracted it, meaning the stolen item, from the container of his brother. There's a lot of repetition of these terms. The question is, what is the significance of this repetition? The word aw'iya or wi'a is not used as a noun, except in this surah, in this specific ayah, in the whole Quran. The verb is used, and we will talk about it later, inshallah, when we talk about the ears what the ears receive. As a container, it receives something. We will talk more about this inshallah in the future. But as a noun, wi'a and aw'iyah, that's the only place where it's used in the whole Quran. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is using the word container, which is something that contains, that carries, that sort of envelops whatever you're putting in it. And that is repeated twice, wi'a'i akhihi, repeated twice, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to stress the fact that Yusuf was searching everything, any container they have, any bag, any sack, any pack, whatever you want to call it. He was searching. He was intent on finding anything he could find. That's the beauty of the expression of the language of the Quran. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is drawing our attention that He's really trying hard to find anything that they have. And He left the containers of His younger brother till the very end, because He thought, okay, if they're going to hide it, they're going to hide it in the containers or the travel packs of the younger one. So He knew that anyway, He's going to find it. But He wanted to try on the off chance, as I said, they were negligent or they were not very specific and deliberate and disciplined in their planning. So unfortunately for Yusuf, he did not find anything except in the container of his younger brother. So he found it in his younger brother's container. So that part was done. The rest of the story as to what happens to the younger brother, we're not told. What happens to him? Well, of course, the law is applied to him. He's taken away, supposedly to prison or whatever. But given that Yusuf is in charge and the king himself is present and the king is in collusion with Yusuf, we can assume for a fact that nothing bad happens to the younger brother because he's really innocent. He's not the one who made that theft. Now, there's a very important lesson here that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is sharing with us. مَا كَانَ لِيَأْخُذَ أَخَاهُ فِي دِينِ الْمَلِكِ. Yusuf was not to detain any of his oldest brothers. Why do I say this? Oldest brothers, أخاهُ. Because any of them is أخاهُ. The Quran refers to them as إخوة. إخوة means brothers or siblings. So therefore, أخاهُ is any one of them. Supposing that he could find anything stolen in any of their containers, he would have had the opportunity to arrest one of the older brothers. So therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, it was not the plan for any of the oldest brothers to be arrested had Yusuf succeeded. Of course, he did not succeed because they were not negligent, they were careful. So therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, he would not succeed to arrest any of them according to the laws of the king. Of course, he could have violated the laws of the king and done something illegal, but he did not. Yusuf would not do this. Now, what else is important? Why is this statement significant? The answer is, specifically, the Quran is denouncing the traditional story that they brought from the corrupted version of the Torah, which existed in the corrupted version of the Torah. In that story, Yusuf is the one who concealed the stolen item in the younger brother's travel pack. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us that did not happen. Allah is declaring Yusuf innocent, as we showed in the prior episode, in the prior segment, YT104, part 11 of this series. So now we go back to another expression, كَذَلِكَ كِدْنَا لِيُوسُف. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala steered the collusion by the brothers, by the older brothers, to become in favor of Yusuf. So Yusuf had not planned to detain the younger brother by trapping him into a theft or anything like that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala declared him innocent. So therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala steered the whole collusion so that the investigation happens, so that the younger brother is actually the one who is caught with the stolen item. Eventually, he would be declared innocent, of course, because Yusuf can vouch for him. He was with Yusuf perhaps or something like that, and the king can overrule whatever investigation that took place. So therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is protecting the younger brother from any harm to come as a result of the investigation. But Yusuf did not know this, and therefore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said He steered the collusion by the brothers to turn in favor of Yusuf himself and the younger brother. So now we have an important principle that we need to review. Plans, whatever plans, even by good people, cannot violate the law of the land, which is referred to in here as Deen al-Malik, the king's established order. Remember when we discussed Surah Al-Fatiha? In Surah Al-Fatiha, we discussed Yawmuddin, the day of the established order, meaning the full law being applied equitably. This is the definition of deen. The deen means the established order. In this case, by Al-Malik. Who else is described as Al-Malik in the Quran? Of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Al-Malik is one of the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this sentence, fi din al-Malik, has dual meanings. It means the king in the land in Misr. It also means the established order by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in this case, they matched and they were congruent with each other. I hope this makes sense. Now, we have a very important principle that we need to review. What is the significance of نرفع درجات من نشاء? نرفع درجات من نشاء. Right here in this ayah. What is the meaning of this expression? Why is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala including this? Remember, the context is Yusuf was not to take any of his older brothers. He knew he's going to eventually take the younger brother because he understood what they had set up, the false flag operation, so to speak. He understood this. But he wanted to do something else, to capture or to catch or to detain or punish one of the older brothers. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not want that to happen. I want you to think a little bit before I give you the answer. Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not wanted Yusuf to rush the judgment of any of the older brothers? And the answer is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to give them more opportunities. As we will see in the next episode, at least one of them will see the truth. At least one of them will speak the truth and will declare that what they've done was wrong, and will declare that the proper things to do is such and such and such. And therefore, at least one of them returns to the right path. Eventually, others from them will return to the right path, as we will see, but not necessarily all of them. And therefore, toward the end of the story, we have some hints. And we also have some hints in Surah Ghafir, Surah 40, that something bad happened to Yusuf at the hands of the siblings, of the brothers. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to not prejudge any person as long as he's alive. And that's the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted for the brothers to continue having the freedom of choice. Perchance one of them will choose the right thing to do. And this is indeed what will happen, and we will see this in the next episode. So نرفع درجات من نشاء applies to the siblings, to the brothers. Some of them will be elevated in status, and we will see this inshallah. وفوق كل ذي علم عليم, meaning above Yusuf, who thought he has all of the siblings figured out. Allah knew more, and Allah will disclose the evidence for at least some of them choosing the right thing to do and making a U-turn and following the right path. And we will see this inshallah. So this is the end of ayah 76, and we continue to ayah 77. قالوا إن يسرق فقد سرق أخ له من قبل فأسرها يوسف في نفسه ولم يبدها لهم قال أنتم شر مكانا والله أعلم بما تصفون. They, the siblings, said, addressing the authorities. Remember, the scene is still in the marketplace, so to speak, or in the court related to the marketplace, and they're having the investigation, and the investigation yielded that the younger brother was the thief. And now they're saying, okay, we got rid of the younger one, let's see if we can get rid of Yusuf. So they said, if the younger one is proven to be a thief, meaning he stole or he steals, know, they're addressing the authorities, know that a brother of his should also be detained because he too stole before. What are they talking about? And you're going to see. Of course, in the traditional story, they told us that Yusuf, when he was young, he stole something from his aunt's house, and all of these silly details that have absolutely no basis in the Quranic stories. In the Quranic story, we don't have such details, but that did not stop the books of tafsir from confabulating all such details that they borrowed from the Old Testament, the corrupted versions of the Old Testament. But we will see what they're really talking about in here. And then the ayah continues. Thereupon Yusuf concealed it, meaning concealed his reaction, and did not reveal it, meaning his identity. Remember, they're trying to figure out what his identity is. How do we know this? Because they said, أَخٌ لَهُ مِنْ قَبْلِ. There's a brother of his who has done something similar, a theft, before meaning before this trip, or before this incident, or before this scene. So what are they referring to? They are referring to the stock in trade that Yusuf concealed within their travel packs and sent back to their father's homestead. So they considered that theft by Yusuf, and they're trying to scandalize Yusuf. They're trying to tell the authorities, look, pay attention, one of you guys, somebody in high authority, has done this. He has returned our stock in trade to us, unbeknownst to us, and sent it back to his father's homestead without us knowing it. And therefore, if you think that this is our theft, no, it was done by this such and such person. They did not know what his name was in Misr, of course. So they referred to him as أخٌ له, meaning a brother of the younger one who was just caught. He himself had stolen before. So go ahead and arrest him, investigate him, follow through and figure out what was missing from whatever accounting methods you have to figure out that really there was a theft in the prior trip. So Yusuf hid and concealed his reaction, did not react to it, nonchalantly sort of ignored it and kept it to himself, and understood that they were trying to annoy him and incite him to come to defend himself, but he just brushed it off. He just did not reveal his identity to them. In other words, not only he did not react to their empty accusation, it's not really empty, it's almost true, but he did not react to it, and he did not fall into the trap of coming forward and identifying himself. But he said to himself in secret, أَسَرَّهَا يُوسُفُ فِي نَفْسِهِ وَلَمْ يُبْدِهَا لَهُمْ قَالَ. He said all of this within himself, meaning in secret, inside himself. You are in a worse standing in Allah's sight. أَنْتُمْ شَرٌّ مَكَانًا وَاللَّهُ أَعْلَمُ بِمَا تَصِفُونَ. And Allah is more capable of exposing the truth about the falsehood you ascribe to me. So therefore, Yusuf did not fall into this trap. So in case you're counting, now there have been 3 attempts. The first attempt is when they entered each one separately according to their father's plan. That did not work. The second attempt is when they pushed for an investigation. That kind of worked, but it did not really work fully. So they did not get to identify who Yusuf was. This is their third attempt. They're directly accusing a brother of the criminal one, of the younger one, so to speak, criminal between double quotes, of course, and hoping to get some sort of reaction from the authorities. No, the authorities did not react because the authorities, of course, were led by Yusuf. So this was their third attempt. Remember, their father told them, attain to your mission using multiple approaches, multiple pretexts, many different ways to achieve your mission. He's giving them the instructions and the strategy. That was the third attempt. Very good. So here, before we leave this ayah, I ask you, the reasons why he concealed his reaction was what? Think about this. The answer has to do with the unspoken fact that we still have to reveal and that underlies the whole story. All right, we'll get back to this, inshallah, in a future segment. So we go to ayah 78. قالوا, this is their fourth attempt now. And we're going to see after this fourth one, they're going to fall into despair. They're going to give up. They don't have any more opportunities to try different things. Now, after they have yelled foul about the theft committed by Yusuf, which was the stock and trade that he concealed in their own travel packs, sending it back to their father, they thought for sure the authorities would come to investigate what's going on. Well, the authorities didn't. So they didn't have anybody else to turn to except the king, the lawmaker himself, so to speak. So they addressed the king himself. They addressed the king on the scene. That's why we said earlier, the king came to the scene, partly in defense of Yusuf, partly to assure that the investigation does not take place. But unfortunately, it had to take place because they kept pushing. Earlier, we saw that the king said, وَأَنَا بِهِ زَعِيمٌ, when he promised to provide a camel's load as a reward to whoever brings it back. That did not work, of course, but the king was on the scene. So now they're addressing the king. قالوا يا أيها العزيز. They said, the siblings, "O reverent one, Al-Aziz." As I said before, this is just a label. This is just a title they used to address the king. That was not his role. There's no function in the government called Al-Aziz, Azizul Misr, as they said. No. That was a title like Jalalatul Malik or Sa'adatul Mudir or Samahatul Shaykh. Those are titles that we give. Mr. President, his role is not Mr. His role is President, but they attach a title to address him. Or Your Eminence or Your Highness. All of these are titles. So they said, "O reverent one, Ya ayyuhal aziz," they're addressing the king. "Inna lahu aban shaykhan kabiran." He has, they're talking about Yusuf, but they don't know what his real name in Misr is. So they can't use the word Yusuf because it may not mean anything to people in Misr. He has a father who is a chief of respected opinion. Aban shaykhan kabiran. Why do we say a chief of respected opinion? Because the word kabiran, you remember we talked about this, فَلَمَّا رَأَيْنَهُ أَكْبَرْنَهُ. When they saw him, they respected or they adopted his opinion, they accepted his opinion. And the word shaykh means a chief, somebody in a high position. So that's a position in leadership. Shaykh, chief of respected opinion. And by the way, this is an Abrahamic locution because in one of the stories about Ibrahim, his wife refers to him, وَهَذَا بَعْلِي شَيْخًا. Shaykh, he is a chief, high stature kind of person. So what have we learned so far? We learned that Yusuf's father, Yaqub, is of a high stature and he's in a position of leadership and he's a position whose opinion is highly respected. Kabiran. فَخُذْ أَحَدَنَا مَكَانَهُ. And therefore detain one of us, we'll come back to this, and extradite him to his place, to his location, to stand legally under his father's jurisdictional authority. So take one of us, detain one of us to the place of the sheikh, the leader, the chief of respected opinion. Take him there or allow us to take him there. Ahadana, one of us, he's one of us. So therefore we are requesting to extradite this thief. You guys are not willing to respond to the accusation we made in Ayah 77 earlier that he has stolen. Okay, let us take him and he will stand in judgment in front of his father. They're still trying all sorts of tricks. And this one is an international extradition request. They are requesting officially to extradite this so-called thief, the brother of the younger one. They didn't know his name, it was Yusuf, but they didn't know what his real name in Misr was. They're asking to extradite him, and they close their argument by saying, "Indeed, we see you," meaning the king, they're addressing the king, "among those who are insightful." So here there's a hint that they're using the Abrahamic locution, but they're also using it in a way to appeal to the king, appeal to the king's justice. So they're saying, you don't have evidence or you don't want to investigate this brother of ours, one of us, allow us to take him and he will stand judgment under his father's law. I hope this is very clear. So addressing the king, Ya ayyuhal aziz, they were doing it just like the locals addressed the king. How do we know they were addressing the king? Because they ran out of options, even after directly disclosing the return of the stock and trade. They did in the prior ayah. This is not about sacrificing themselves instead of the younger brother, as the traditional story told us. It has nothing to do with this. They're not that soft-hearted. They're not that kind of good people. They're really evil people. They're still pursuing the original plan that they discussed in the very opening part of the surah, which is to get rid of Yusuf. So do you think if the king had allowed them to take Yusuf with them, just on the off chance that he did, do you think Yusuf would make it alive back to his father's homestead? Absolutely not. And the king knew this, and of course he would never allow Yusuf to leave with them. So they were trying to have Yusuf detained and extradited. Now we're going to see in the next ayah how the king responds to this request for international extradition. I told you this surah includes international law, includes principles of how to deal with jurisdictions, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching us important lessons about how to enforce the laws each law according to its jurisdiction. And this is a beautiful lesson, very advanced lesson for those of you who have studied the philosophy of law and the philosophy of international law. And finally, the expression Aban, Shaykhan, Kabiran is to be understood using the Abrahamic locution. Where did they learn it? They learned it, of course, by listening to how people were addressing Yaqub and how Yaqub defined himself, and people around Yaqub defined him. He was a Shaykh Kabir, meaning a leader whose opinion is respected and valued and honored, because that's how Yaqub's people referred to him. So again, all of these things give us a clear indication that these are the brothers talking, and the brothers are trying different ways to still get to their original plan of getting rid of Yusuf. And with this we come to ayah 79. The answer came, and we'll see who actually said this answer. قال معاذ الله أن نأخذ إلا من وجدنا متاعنا عنده إنا إذا لظالمون. He, Yusuf, said in secret to the king, we'll see why, I seek the refuge of Allah if we were to detain anyone other than the one with whom we found our chattel, our stuff. For indeed, we would then be among the transgressors. Of course, this response is not responding to their accusation about Yusuf. This response is not necessarily related to their request. This is a general declaration by the king. Why do I say the king? But it was Yusuf saying it in secret to the king. Because the word ma'adh Allah occurs in this surah only at the voice of Yusuf. So it was Yusuf who said this in the woman's chamber. So we know this is the word of Yusuf. Yusuf is using that word, ma'adh Allah. So did the king learn that language? Perhaps. But definitely that opinion came from Yusuf. Remember, Yusuf became a teacher, a leader for the king, sort of teaching him the principles of the Abrahamic monotheism. So this is something that Yusuf said in secret to the king, or the king had already learned and responded in accordance to what Yusuf taught him. Regardless, this word ma'adh Allah is clearly something that Yusuf would say. We would not detain anyone without evidence. Without evidence, this is what he's saying. So therefore, he's also telling them, you guys don't have evidence. You're just making empty accusations. Where's the evidence? There's no evidence. So therefore, we're not going to detain anyone. We're not going to punish anyone in the absence of evidence. But of course, between the lines, we're reading that the king wanted to stop the investigation, to end it. Khalas, it's over. Forget it. We're not going to continue down this path that you guys are pushing for. And then the conclusion, if we do this, we would be among the transgressors. Inna idhan ladhalimun. So refusing to extradite across borders the accused person without having clear evidence in accordance with the local laws. Why? Because this is the protection for the individual, and this is the protection of society. In other words, even if he did commit a crime far away and he took refuge in this city or in this land, as long as he's not committing crimes in this land, he has the right to our protection. This is the beauty of the Islamic legal philosophy. The purpose of punishment is to protect society. And therefore, as long as society is protected, even if the person has really committed a crime of some sort, such as theft, then the past society is protected from his acts. And as long as he's living here in this new land, not committing any new crimes, he's fine. He's protected. The society is also protected. So we're not going to punish him based on what he did somewhere else under a different legal jurisdiction. And we're going to allow every individual the protection of having a second chance. This is part of the legal philosophy of Islam and the Quran. I hope this makes sense. We're not going to get into this a lot in this series, but I'm giving you a taste of all of the concepts that are enriching the surah and enriching the story with all sorts of details. Remember, the context of this story or this surah is for our beloved Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam before he left Mecca, before he went to Medina to establish a state. This was all training for our beloved Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, training him to get ready for all of these issues. There are legal issues, security issues, social issues, criminal issues, evidence, false accusations, cliques, groups, and we're going to see in part 2 of the story, which is the part where Yusuf was alone in Misr, we're going to see all sorts of political issues and conspiracies and attempts against the king himself and all sorts of details that we're going to get into. This story, as I promised you, is very rich with information. Has nothing to do with the Disney-like story of a woman trying to seduce the child that she raised in her own house and the silly stuff that they brought from the corrupted version of the Old Testament. And now we come to the closing remarks. We do not know, as I said, what happened to the younger brother other than he is arrested and taken away, but surely Yusuf would not let any harm come to him, and therefore the Quran does not need to talk about it because we know of the laws of the king that he would turn out to be innocent, which he was. And finally, as I mentioned, the international extradition request and how they are to be dealt with are discussed in this surah, along with so many other beautiful concepts that we have covered in this surah so far. I hope you're enjoying this surah so far and this story. As I told you, this is a very complex and sophisticated story, and inshallah you're benefiting from it. And with this we come to the closure of this segment. Alhamdulillah alladhi hadana lihada wa ma kunna linahtadiya lawla an hadana Allah laqad ja'at rusulu rabbina bil haqq. I thank you so much for watching. Assalamu alaikum.